Welcome to another edition of Big in Biz with DiViz. My guest today is Beth Miller. She is CEO of Executive Velocity, a top talent and leadership development advisory firm. We're going to talk about her brand new book, Replaceable, An Obsession with Succession. Stay tuned. Welcome back to another edition of Big in Biz with DiViz. I'm Craig DiVizzio, and we have got a timely guest today. My guest today is Beth Miller. She is CEO of Executive Velocity. It's a top talent and leadership development advisory firm. She's a trusted executive consultant, Vistage Chair Emeritus, and community volunteer. She's also a very sought-after speaker on hiring, leadership development, and succession planning, and that's what we're going to talk about today a lot. She's the author of two books. First book is Replaceable, An Obsession with Succession, which is very interesting. I love the title of that one. And the second book is Are You Talent Obsessed? What a cool thing. She's also a graduate of Babson College and Harvard Business School's OPM program. She recently published her second book, Replaceable, An Obsession with Succession. It helps business owners and leaders identify and develop their successors. Beth, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Craig.
Real pleasure to have you here. As I mentioned in the intro, this is really timely right now because we've got and there's a lot of titles, the Great Resignation, the
Yes.
Great Reshuffle, the Big Quit,
Yes.
whatever we would do. And I actually call it the Great Awakening. So maybe I'll tie in and talk a little bit about that as you talk about it. But where do you want to start with this? Let's talk about your book and talk about maybe a little bit to start with what's kind of going on right now from your perspective, because this is your field.
Yeah. Well, we're hopefully, knock on wood, coming out of 2 years of, the pandemic. And during those 2 years, there was a lot of flux in the marketplace, specifically for small businesses. I mean, a lot of them were just in survival mode. And you have business owners now coming out of it, and many of them that have, had these companies for years saying, gosh, is now the time for me to retire or exit. And many of them, in fact, over 50% of them, don't have a succession plan. They have not identified their successor. And they haven't also identified successors to their key leadership. So they're really without a rudder, as I like to say. And the important thing about succession planning is really you really need to start a lot earlier. Starting when you have decided you want to retire is actually a little too late, because you need to be developing people so that they're prepared to be in the right seat at the right time versus trying to get them up to speed when they're in a seat that they're not prepared for. So my work is around helping those businesses create succession plan where they have a leadership pipeline throughout the organization. It's not just about that business owner. It's about having managers and key leaders identify their potential successors and create development plans to get them up to speed. So that's...
I remember working in a company once, and they had for their leadership a fast track program. And the fast track program, unfortunately, was their attempt at catching up from what you clearly identified earlier was an unsuccessful or a very poor plan to start with. And so they had a lot of people leave in a very short period of time, but it really wasn't even driven by that. It's just that they really had kind of languished in teaching people or training people, preparing people for the next job.
Right.
Then they got in and said, okay, we're going to start this succession plan.
Mm-hmm.
And they needed to move people so quickly. What I heard from the employees of those managers who were being moved quickly was, my manager doesn't really spend any time with us doing anything for us. They spend all their time in class trying to learn
Yeah.
everything they need to learn. And of course the people who were going through the fast track program, they felt bad because they felt underprepared.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That they probably felt like they were set up for failure versus, being developed along the way to be fully prepared.
They're set up for failure. The employees are upset at them,
Right.
and they're doing their best to learn the position as quickly as they can.
Yeah.
It was almost though that as soon as they learned that position, they were getting moved to another position, and so there wasn't any time to implement. Is there a minimum amount of time? Talk a little bit about this. And I know it's different for different positions, but
Yeah, it clearly is. If the key is to identify high potentials before they even get into leadership. Those and I talk about it in my book that potential is different than performance, and there oftentimes is confusion of a high performer being somebody that has potential to lead. Those I liken them to those subject matter experts, the SMEs, who are a really good technician or a really good engineer, and their leader sees that they're doing great work, and then says, "Oh gosh, they're going to be the next manager of that."
And isn't that the way it used to be, even more than it is now?
Yeah.
Historically, and you tell me if you saw things differently than I did. To me, it was the person who maybe had the most tenure in the position. Or if it was a skill position,
Right. Yeah.
that I got one person's got 5 years, another person's got 10, another person's got 15 years as the mechanic. Well, who's going to be the mechanic supervisor?
Right.
The person with the 15, who's got the most time in the
Right.
position.
Yeah. Which
Has nothing.
doesn't have anything to do with potential.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Talk
Yeah.
a little bit more about that. So, what are people looking for? If we're not, certainly performance is one of them.
You've got to have somebody that's highly performing, but
Right.
then you've got to understand, what does potential look like in your organization? Because every organization has a different culture, and that culture needs to align with the leadership competencies that you are looking for a leader. But there are some things that are general. Those things like somebody that really aspires to leadership. There are people that I have ended up coaching who have been put in a position of leadership when they were never really asked. It was just assumed that, hey, we're going to give you this position, and they took it, and then they realized that leadership really probably wasn't their gig. They were kind of separated from their knowledge, and that was really where they wanted to be. They wanted to, understand the latest technology. They didn't really want to be leading people. So one of the things in the book I talk about is the importance of having career conversations with your employees. It's not just about performance conversations, but looking ahead and asking people, what is it that you want out of your career? I had one client who talked to an employee, had a career conversations, and found out that the guy was doing stand-up comedy on the weekends. And that's really what he wanted to do. Well, clearly that wasn't going to fit with his role.
Leadership, right.
So my client was like, okay, well, how do we help you get there? And 3 years later, this guy moved to California, and that's what he became, was a stand-up comic. So you have to, as a leader, you have to be willing to hear those kinds of requests and help those individuals, because if you ignore it, then you're probably going to be causing problems within the organization, because
Yeah.
that person is not going to be fully motivated, and may cause issues with their team members.
I have worked in, and you appreciate this story because it is totally in agreement with what you just said. Worked in organizations where people were encouraged to go into leadership. Hey, Beth, I really think that when this next position opens up in leadership of this group or another group, you should bid on
Right.
that job. And the person would say, but I don't want to be in leadership.
Right.
No, but I think it would be good exposure for you to even go through the interview.
Right.
No, but I don't really want to be. No, but I think you'd make some good content. And you know, in some ways, some of these companies really pushed people, unfortunately.
Right.
And then, of course, there's also the driver of making more money. Sometimes in leadership, I know sometimes in your individual contributor positions, depending on whether they get overtime or whatever, you
Right.
can make way more money than the leader
Right.
gets. So one of the first things, we got to have good performance.
Yes.
And then you've got to have an inclination,
Right.
or a motivation or a drive to even be a leader.
Right.
And even if you do that, my contention is, and I'm sure yours is, that's still not enough.
No.
Okay.
And then the other thing that most high potentials have is they are seeking out opportunities for growth. They're the ones
Okay.
that raise their hand when there's a new project. You know, put me on that. So they are they're self-motivated. They're drivers, and they're lifelong learners. They want to expand their horizons. So those are things that are typical of high potentials. But there might be things that are specific to your organization that would be considered high potential. It could be, for instance, like a marketing organization, and creativity is, you know, a core competency
Right.
within the organization. So it might be that it's important that those high potentials have external contacts. So their network, they seek to have a broader network. So those are the things that you need to really think about and define as to what potential looks like in the organization. Because the larger your organization is, the more high potentials you'll have, hopefully. And there'll be other people that aren't on that high potential track, but they need to understand why. And if you can clearly communicate to everybody, this is what we're looking for in high potential, then there's not going to be hurt feelings that, well, why did Craig get into the high potential program and not me? You can have that conversation and say, well, remember we talked about these were the things we were looking for, and you're missing, you know, two of those attributes.
So talk a little bit more about, because as you were talking, I was thinking, the larger the organization, the greater number of high potentials you would expect.
Right?
And,
Yes. Right.
and what I added a couple of words to your sentence.
Yeah.
You didn't know it at
Yeah.
the time. I added, if you're hiring correctly.
Correct.
You know, and
Yes.
so is some of this rolled into, should an organization be looking for this? Let's say and I know there's a lot of organizations are in lots of different situations, but let's say I'm an organization. My organization doesn't really have a succession plan that would live up to what you're suggesting in your book. Okay, so I'm in a deficit
Right.
arena there in some way, shape, or form. Should I be doing some of that searching for potential leaders even in my hiring, though I may not be hiring them directly for a leadership position?
Yes.
Talk a little bit about
yes,
that.
yeah. So what I talk about in the book is core competencies, and core competencies are a group of skills and behaviors that you seek as it relates to any employee. Okay, so So there's a benchmark. All employees should have this one set of core competencies that support your values, all right? And there are certain behaviors. Then there's another level of leadership competencies that all leaders should have. Well, if you're interviewing, then the best way to be getting a potential pool of future leaders is to be looking for those potential leadership competencies within the interviewing process. I recommend that you have a specific set of questions that you ask all employees on a consistent basis, and that you also use an assessment, a validated assessment tool that takes some of the bias out of the interview process. What I find in most small companies is there's no consistent hiring process. There's generally one or two managers that have some best practices, but none of the other managers know about it. And bringing the hiring managers together and understanding what kind of questions are being asked and determining which ones everybody should be asking and what are the answers that you should be listening for. I mean, it's great to ask a question, but what's the good answer? Or what's the great answer?
I couldn't agree more. I've got a course that I have taught for years. My title is Conducting Effective Interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find is similar to what you just said is most companies, I personally don't understand why they have not, and maybe the CEO is not the person to have the conversation with, maybe it's the CFO. Mm-hmm. Because when the statistics that I've last heard is 80% of turnover in companies is due to poor hiring practices. Mm-hmm. And so what you're talking about is we've got a number of questions that everybody gets asked, but you may be looking for things in the interview that aren't really reflected in the question that you asked.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. We're going to talk more about that, and we will be right back after this short break. The number one reason why most people are unsuccessful is that they hate doing the work. Man, I don't even want to think about getting prepared. For those of you who are really struggling with, I don't really want to do the work, I've done most of the work for you. I've made the process easier. All you got to do is pick up one piece of material and everything that you need is there. I guarantee it. I've got thousands of students from my classes who've been successful using this approach. I know it works. You need to up your game. You can do it, but you got to figure out what's the best way for me to do it. You know you need to start preparing now. Everything that I knew over 40 years is in my book and in my interviewing skills online course. Everybody's got a favorite learning style. All you got to do is watch it, read it, listen to it. See you. And welcome back. I've been talking with Beth Miller. We're talking about her book, Replaceable, An Obsession with Succession. And Beth, talk a little bit more now about just exactly what you're suggesting in the book that a company who maybe not up to speed, maybe that's not the correct terminology, but they're a little bit behind the curve with this. Talk about how they would go about designing that and creating that from start. And of course, I know that is included in your book, but give us a couple of hints here.
Well, one of the things that I find with smaller businesses is that they're focused on the people that are sitting in the positions versus, first of all, looking at their organization and identifying what are the key positions without the people in them. What are those key positions that are critical to the success of your company? And I've got a worksheet that helps companies go through and identify what those key positions are. And once you do that, then you take a look at the people and say, okay, are there any development opportunities for them? Or are they really in the right seat? Maybe they need to be shifted. Or maybe the position needs to be enhanced based on your future strategy. There might be key positions in the organization that don't even exist based on strategy changes. I was talking to a woman last night who had that situation where the company is shifting and they need some key positions that they don't have anybody in the organization that could fit that.
So they've got to get that.
They've got to
Those
recruit.
people, they got to either get that or to even for the longer term, get some of the people in there
Right.
and start feeding them the information,
Right.
the courses, the training, whatever
Right.
they need to be. Okay.
Exactly. And the way that they go about evaluating the individuals in the position is through understanding the core competencies of that position. What are the behaviors and skills that are important for success in that position? And then through gap analysis, you can determine what kind of development does that individual need to have. So that's based on existing positions and existing people. Then you've got the rest of your employees who are the worker bees down there, and you want to figure out who has the potential to rise up into the organization. And we talked a little bit earlier about the difference between performance and potential, and really getting clear on that. And then it's all about development. And development, I really encourage development to be practical for small to mid-sized companies, because they generally don't have the budget of a Coca-Cola.
Right.
So what are those development opportunities that aren't going to really cost a lot of money, like job enhancement or assigning projects to individuals where they're going to gain some new experiences and knowledge that will help prepare them for that next level. So
Yeah, I'm trying to put myself in the position of a business that is, let's say, marginal in terms of their success,
Mm-hmm.
but they're still operating, and them hearing you and saying, gosh, you talk about how we've got to do a lot of training with these people and spend a lot of time figuring out all these conversations, these
Right.
career conversations, and the pushback being, Beth, we just don't have time to do that because we need everybody, putting the nut on the bolt just to stay in business.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you go with something? Because I'm sure you have people who push back and go,
Yeah.
we just don't have time, we don't have the money. I mean, it could be probably more things than that
Right.
as the pushback.
My first question would be, so what's your greatest asset? People. I mean, if you don't have your employees, you don't have a company. And if the leaders have that mindset, then they are going to invest in their greatest asset, which is people. There are some people that, mostly old school, that will say, well, I pay them, to come to work and do a job, right? Well, how's that working for you now during the Great Resignation? How many people have you lost because they don't feel like there's a future for them? One of the statistics I state in the book is that millennials, 90% of them will stay longer with an organization if they know there is a succession plan, because they know that there's going to be opportunities for growth for them and development.
Yeah, isn't that the one of the things and there's a fairly long list.
Mm-hmm.
I do a presentation on generational similarities and differences, and within that presentation talk about what do people really want from a company or want from a workplace. And the one that you mentioned is we want to do meaningful work. We also want a pathway to success.
Right.
We want to know, something that is simple enough for me to understand. How do I get ahead in this company?
Right.
And if I realize that there's opportunity there, I will stay longer than the couple of years that is the average for
Right.
people to go.
Exactly.
So they're actually, so in that sense, it's almost just from a smart for a company to say we need to have this, or we are going to have a whole slew
Right.
of these two youngest generations. Once they find that out, they'll either leave or they'll never even join.
Right.
Because, okay.
Yeah, and there's the short term, short-sighted of, well, gosh, we're going to invest in these people and they're going to leave, right? But if the individual feels like you treated them well, and okay, so they've got another opportunity 3 years from now that you can't match. You're just not in the position,
Right.
either financially or the organization. That person still is going to walk away thinking great things about you and your company. And employer brand, you can't buy that. It takes time. And that individual could end up coming back at some point or sending their friends and family to you. And that's very valuable.
And if they have given 100% effort while they were there, that's pretty darn important also,
Oh,
because
yes.
because we know, having worked with people, we've got a lot of people. I don't know how many it is. We have a number of people working in companies that are occupying, they're taking up space,
Yes.
but they're not really giving their efforts.
That's a really good point, Craig. There's some statistic where you've got the A, B, and C players, and those A players can do the same amount of work as 3 C players. It's a huge ratio.
Right.
So you want the positive turnover is to get rid of those C players, right, and retain more of the A players, and get some of those B players to A players.
Right.
Right.
Right. Talk a little bit about how people changing jobs more frequently has affected this whole process.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it has created some of these business owners to resist investing because, well, gosh, I'm going to invest time with
And
these,
then they're
and they're going to go, right?
Right.
And so there goes my investment. So then there's the whole conversation of, well, yes and no. You've got to look at this long term, and it might come back where you get other employees because you've been good to that one employee. There's the aspect of wanting, intellectually knowing that investing in employees is the right thing. But there's that time aspect too. We may have the money, but we don't have the time involved. And they need to get over that in some way, shape, or form. And part of that usually is when they start having turnover, and there are exit interviews that take place, and HR comes back to them and says, we're seeing a trend here. we need to fix this.
Right.
Yeah.
What is your thinking on, we talked about the potentials. So now we identify people who have great performance, they've got the inclination, they have a number of the characteristics or qualities that we would assess we want in our leadership. So they're checking all the boxes
Yes.
off. Is there, what I have in my work with leadership found is that there are people who get into those positions. They don't even have to be pushed necessarily, but they gravitate toward the position. They're in it for a while, and then they realize, wait a second now. I wish that I had had a look-see at what daily life was like in this leadership
Yep.
position. I don't think that I can, that this is for me,
Yeah,
even
right.
though I thought it was before I got here. And then there's a reluctance for some of them to go backwards because now they're going like, what is it? I'm never going to get another leadership opportunity
Right.
because they invested all this time and money in me, and now I jumped out of leadership. So do you suggest for companies any type of 6-month reevaluation plan?
Oh, yeah.
No harm, no foul if you want to jump out. Have you seen any of that work well, or is that not?
Yeah, I've only seen it maybe one or two times when something like that has happened, and it generally doesn't end well. Um,
In what way?
well, the individual ends up leaving the
Oh,
organization.
okay.
Yeah, yeah, because that they've they've trusted in sharing their concerns with their leadership, and the leadership then is they try and figure out where to put this person. The smaller the organization, the harder that is,
Right,
right?
right.
In a Coca-Cola again, you've got dozens and hundreds of positions that you could easily move somebody like that. But if you've only got 100 people, that's really hard. That's a real challenge.
Hmm.
So generally, those people end up, leaving the organization, which is
Is there any overriding reason that whatever the percentage is of
mm-hmm,
companies who are not doing this the way they should be,
mm-hmm,
that this is the number one reason I'd say out of all the people that I've evaluated who are really not up to snuff on this, 75% of them, this is the issue. This is why they're not, haven't invested the time and the energy and the money into this. Is there one reason that's just glaring? Because if you're a company, small, big, or indifferent and everything, I want you to be hearing this and saying, yeah, that's us. That's why we keep not doing this. So
yeah.
talk a little bit about that.
It's usually the business owner.
Okay.
They're not ready. Um, Intellectually they are, but emotionally they're not. And I've spent time with business owners getting them to be clear on what the world will look like for them after exiting. They don't have a clear plan. The successful people that exit um, start planning years in advance, and they're really clear about what their life will look like. There's generally 3 or 4 buckets. There's the hobbies that they haven't had time to do, so they want to take it up, or get better at golf or whatever. There's the volunteer kind of activities, giving back to the community. There's the family where all of a sudden you've got grandkids and want to spend more time there. So there's some major buckets, but there are a lot of business owners that say they want to exit in 3 years. Well, 3 years comes and nothing's really happened. That's the big one. The second roadblock is that they don't have the capacity internally to drive the program. So I'm oftentimes called in to help facilitate, getting the plan together, and
In the
then
consulting role.
right.
Okay.
But what happens is then when I leave, there's no one individual that's kind of driving the ongoing maintenance of the talent conversations on an annual basis to review people, and reviewing your core competencies annually, and developing the people. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I wished it was easier to put a financial price tag
Yeah.
on the mistake that they're making by doing that. It's
Mm-hmm.
kind of we talked a little bit before we jumped on the air about how people got exposed.
Right.
There were a lot of this pandemic has exposed people in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
People who are living a fabulous lifestyle and really could have saved some money, but they didn't, and then they lost their job and they got exposed
Yeah.
where it wouldn't have happened. And to have a financial price tag on that to a CFO, let me tell you what's going to happen.
Right.
What it's really going to cost you, bottom line, if you don't, provide this succession plan.
And it is hard.
Yeah.
I recommend that businesses, when they put a business plan together, that a succession plan is a portion of their
Okay.
business plan.
All right.
So that it makes it an annual event, that you're refreshing it and reviewing, the progress, the development progress of your high potentials, to determine, are individuals ready, and or if they're not, what other development opportunities are there?
Yeah. And those conversations, you talked about having those career conversations on an ongoing basis. Even if you put somebody on a track, they're a high potential, and you're putting them on a track of developing them. Somewhere along that track, they may decide, hey, I've changed my mind.
Right, exactly. It could be a personal situation,
Right.
Where, there might be a parent that all of a sudden is ill, and you have to spend more time with them. So, something like that, well, gosh, I really don't have the capacity now to be that leader that's going to, need extra time to, weekends and things like that to take care of.
Yeah,
of business.
you would hope that, of course, as you identified, if you get the business owner on board,
Yes.
then typically that's the best way for it to be continually emphasized
Right.
throughout the company.
Right.
And then what I would expect is you really want every leader to be incorporating that in their
Oh, yes.
conversations with their employees.
Definitely, and managers, when they understand the importance of identifying their successor, because if they don't have a successor, the likelihood of them being able to be elevated is less, because their management isn't going to want that person to move into a VP role if there's not a successor in line to take their position.
Yeah, I've even worked in organizations where to move up, you had to already have developed the person. And if you haven't developed anybody to replace you, you can't move up. And so there's a built-in incentive there
exactly.
to do that. So, well, we're wrapping up. What else do you want to leave the viewers with as to tips we're certainly going to make sure that everybody goes out and buys a copy of Replaceable, An Obsession with Succession, because it sounds like you've got way more in there than we certainly could cover in a half hour today.
Yeah.
But any way you want to close this out?
Well, I just want business owners and managers to really be thinking about who's going to step into their role, and how are you going to get them there in a timely manner, so that they're ready when you're ready to move on.
Great. And Beth, how can people reach you?
LinkedIn, Beth Armconnect Miller, which I'm sure will be on your website. I will not spell it, but I'm the only one. And then my book is out on Amazon.
Sounds great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here today and giving us a lot of really good information on a very, very timely situation for lots of companies right now.
Well, thank you, Craig.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's it for another edition of Big in Biz. I want to thank you for watching. Till next time, stay cool, have good thoughts. See you.